Okay, well, welcome everybody. Good to have you with us tonight as we continue in our study here. We're up to week 5. We got one more to go after tonight. So as we have been moving through, the themes have gotten progressively bleaker here. So gonna hit it kind of heavy here tonight, and also next week, then we'll be looking at the crucifixion right there in the middle of Holy Week. So that'll leave us right where we need to be on Wednesday of Holy Week, I guess. So anyway, here we are, week 5. Plenty Good Room is the book, and Ain't It That Good News is the spiritual for tonight. So let's see if this works.
Got a crown up in the kingdom, ain't that good news? Got a crown up in the kingdom, ain't that good news? I'm gonna lay down this world, gonna shoulder up on my cross, gonna take it home to my Jesus, ain't that good news?
Got a harp up in the kingdom, ain't that good news? Got a harp up in the kingdom, ain't that good news?
I'm gonna lay down this world, gonna shoulder up on my cross, gonna take it home to my Jesus, ain't that good news?
Got a robe up in the kingdom, ain't that good news? Got a robe up in the kingdom, ain't that good news?
I'm gonna lay down this world, gonna shoulder up on my cross, gonna take it home to my Jesus, ain't that good news?
Got slippers in the kingdom, ain't that good news? Got slippers in the kingdom, ain't that good news?
I'm gonna lay down this world, gonna shoulder up on my cross, gonna take it home to my Jesus, ain't that good news? Got a Savior in the kingdom, ain't that good news? Got a Savior in the kingdom, ain't that good news? I'm gonna lay down this world, gonna shoulder up on my cross, gonna take it home to my Jesus, ain't that good news?
Yeah, it's very nice. Well, lovely voice the soloist has. It's just clear, and I love that. Yeah, indeed. All right. Well, I went looking for any background about this song, couldn't find a thing. Not a thing at all. So we're just going to press on, and there we go. So there is some biblical imagery herein, as we have been taking note of. I'm just going to lay these all up here, I think. Up in that kingdom. So what kingdom would that be, of course? Kingdom of heaven, I believe is correct. Yes, indeed. Got a crown, got a harp, got a robe, got slippers. Pipe. And a fez, right? Yeah. So any thoughts on where any of those come from? Crown of thorns, okay. Any others?
The harp is the Psalms,
Oh, good. Yeah, okay. Very nice.
but I don't understand the robe and the slippers.
Okay. Anybody know?
Well, they threw a robe on him before they, put his regular clothes back on him.
Okay. Yeah. So there's that robe. There's that robe. Yeah. Also in the book of Revelation, the martyrs get a white robe that has been washed in the blood of the Lamb, and crowns also, I believe they get crowns. And someone up in there gets a harp. as well. So you get harps and palm branches, I think. So that palm branches aren't in there. And I don't know about the slippers. I don't remember too much mention of the slippers. Well, you know. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Bunny slippers or I don't know, something comfortable though, anyway. Yeah. So all these, what do these suggest if it's that kind of imagery? What does that suggest as opposed to the crown of thorns and the robe of humiliation? What about the other one there?
Are you
So-
talking about the slave owners? If somebody gets them up in the middle of the night?
Say a little more.
Well, they think they are their own lord, since they're lording everything over them by their crown.
Uh-huh.
Have their own music. And I suppose the robe and the slippers and the corn cob pipe and the fez and whatever else it is.
Okay, all right. So these might be things that you would associate with easy living, somebody that's in charge, somebody on whom someone who gets waited upon rather than having to wait upon somebody.
I'm going to suggest that most spirituals came from, a hard life.
Oh, yeah.
Hardships in life.
Yep.
And what they realized is, when you go to your great reward, that things, grace of God, can be a lot better. That's what Jesus told us.
That's what we're hoping,
And
right?
I think that's what they generally, in spirituals, tend to aim toward and saying about.
Yeah, so there's, as we've seen, there's often kind of there's the hopefulness of this imagery that my life is crap here, but up there, it's going to be beautiful, it's going to be comfortable, it's going to be, it'll recognize my worth, right? And there's the prophetic side of it that's saying, why isn't that now, right? Why is this my life? And why is this that I'm singing about closer to this guy who's forcing me into labor? So, it's calling that into question. But then with this one, my life is going to be comfortable up into that kingdom. And then I'm going to shoulder up my cross. Gonna lay down this world, gonna shoulder up my cross, gonna take it home to Jesus. Interesting juxtaposition there of the comfort that it seems to be talking about and recognition, but taking up the cross is the way to get there.
Yeah, you gotta, before you're given, you gotta get to heaven, you gotta go through
Yeah,
tribulation.
yeah.
And that seems to be part and parcel of life living on this planet.
It seems so. It seems. There it is. Take it home to my Jesus. Well, all right. So here's the scripture for this evening. This is not the same as what's in the book. That's in the book. It's the CEB, Contemporary English Bible, I think, or something. This is the NLT because I like it better. So there. So let's see, we got a few chunks here. Anybody feel like reading?
Always game,
All right, fire away.
Some of the governor's soldiers took Jesus into their headquarters and called out the entire regiment. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. They wove thorn branches into a crown and put it on his head, and they placed a reed stick in his right hand as a scepter. Then they knelt before him in mockery and taunted, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spit on him and grabbed the stick and struck him on the head with it. When they were finally tired of mocking him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him again. Then they led him away to be crucified.
Okay. Somebody else want to pick up? Well, I got two paragraphs. Sue, you do the first one, and Bertha, you do the.
Along the way, they came across a man named Simon, who was from Cyrene, and the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus to the cross. And they went out to a place called Golgotha, which means place of skull. The soldiers gave Jesus wine mixed with bitter gall, but when he had tasted it, he refused to drink it. After they nailed him to the cross, the soldiers gambled with his clothes by throwing dice. Then they sat around and kept guard as he hung there. Simon was fastened up. Announcing the charge against him, said, "This is Jesus."
Word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Indeed. So our key verse for tonight, or the memory verse, if you will, along the way, they came across a man named Simon who was from Cyrene. The soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. So.
I always thought Jesus was forced to carry his own cross. That's what they do.
It depends on which gospel.
Oh,
So this happens in at least two, and I should have looked it up to see if it's three, but at least two of them say Simon was made to carry his cross for him. In John's gospel, John is very explicit in saying he carried his own cross. So there are different reasons why they might have those differences in there. John, in John's gospel, the crucifixion is the point of glory for Jesus. That's the high point in John's gospel. And Jesus is shown as being very strong in going to the cross. He has made that choice himself. He says several times, "I lay down my life. This is my choice. I'm doing this. Nobody makes me do this, right? Except that I'm obeying the will of God, the Father." And he goes to the cross, carrying his own cross, and when he dies, it's in John's gospel that he says it's finished, and he breathes his last. Whereas in like Luke's gospel, he says, "Why have you forsaken me?" and cries out and then dies. Right? So it's very different how John is presenting the crucifixion. Did that answer the question? What was the question? Oh yeah, I thought he carried his own cross, right? Yeah. Yeah. So in John's gospel was probably written later, and so had this theological bent that he was taking. It is as likely to be the more historically accurate, which wasn't always what they were worried about in writing the Gospels, but that Jesus got so beat up before the crucifixion that he could not carry the cross all the way. And the soldiers, sure as shooting, weren't going to do it for him. So there we go.
As they say,
That-
oftentimes the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Maybe collapse or.
Yeah, I mean, there are, Luke's gospel, I think it's Luke's gospel that records Jesus falling as he's making his way. And after he falls twice, that's when they get Simon to carry the cross. So, you know, we get these different details from the different gospels. And if you've done the Stations of the Cross that we've put out here, you know, a couple of them are Jesus falls. So that's part of the deal. Okay, well, that went darker quicker than I was anticipating, but here we go. So if you had opportunity to read the Lenten meditation for this week in, excuse me, it talks about the contradictions that happen in life and in some sense in the gospel. Some of our siblings in the faith don't like to think that there are any contradictions in our faith or in scripture. We've just explored that there are, but in this, the author brings out Matthew 11:28-30, where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy to bear, and my burden is light." And then goes on to talk about a yoke being that, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago in worship, I think. So the yoke being the thing that you put on an animal to get them to go the right direction. You got to train them to be able to do that, because ain't nobody likes wearing a yoke, right? The animals do not care for that to begin with, and you can train them into it. And as it says here, a burden is called a burden for a reason, because it's hard, it's heavy. And so it's a contradiction to say the yoke is easy, the burden is light, but nevertheless, there it is. And so here we have the cross being lifted up as that burden. And so it says here, the enslaved ancestors who knew something about heavy burdens sang joyfully about lifting it onto their shoulders. So in the song, I'm going to lay down the world, and I'm going to shoulder up the cross. So as opposed to the contemporary need for instant gratification, it says they took the long view. They knew they had nothing, not even their own bodies down here on earth. And in making the decision to take up the cross of Christ and follow in his discipline, they exercised free will and exchanged a worldview of oppression for a kingdom perspective where God would eventually provide all that they needed. So that's some good news if you're in that situation. So here's our opening prayer. We thank you, Lord, for the heaviness of your message. Okay, pressing on. Again, in the book, we have the first edition notes. So from Mr. Baldwin here, from the earlier version, the 2002 version, taking up our crosses and the crowns in the kingdom. Quite a few questions raised in this, and so did y'all get a chance to read any of this, or? All right. Well, so again, it says we like slaves have the opportunity to increase our understanding of what it means to take up our cross and follow Jesus. So I got some questions here, and I think these are I think I got the questions here. Yeah.
You know, it's funny because he says, you know, come to me, take up my burden is light, my yoke is easy, but then in other, being a Christian's not like, oh, that's everything just go swimming well. No, I mean, we see even today, Christians are executed more. Yeah, so my question is, okay, I'm going to apologize to God no matter what.
Yeah.
You know, that.
Uh-huh.
I hear all the countries where they literally take their life in their hands to be even to discuss Christianity, but it's worship.
Uh-huh.
So I wonder, you know, you gotta say, you know, heck with this world. I know that my eternal life is with God, love with Jesus, and
right.
And I want what happens here is only part of the big thing.
Yeah.
Or do live here, we eat, stop running. We do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to come back to some of those things, I think. So was that before we even got to this question? Because there it is. What does it mean to lay down this world? Lay down the burdens and burdens. Okay. All right. Yeah, like the ultimate leaving them behind in death, or some other way. I don't have an answer for that in a moment. What did you have in mind, or did you? Okay. All right. Okay. See? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So dying to self. Turn your life over. Okay. So what does that mean? Okay. 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 Any other thoughts? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we skipped over that verse. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Learn from me. Exactly. Yeah. Could it maybe mean laying down the values of this world? And if that, then what might that mean? Well, we could continue that loop for a long while. Yeah. I think that's basically what it's all about, is whose priorities are you gonna be following? Are Christians in the US today showing readiness to take up the cross for the gospel of Christ?
By and large, I'd say a lot of them are searching that, but there are pockets of those who don't want it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else think one way or the other? It is broad, isn't it? It is a pretty broad term. Amen. It does. It does. Yeah.
Or at least people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So we have different understandings of what being Christian means. We have different understanding of what the gospel is. And varying degrees, perhaps, of showing readiness for taking up the cross.
Yeah, I think it is something about taking up the cross. What does that really entail? I think
Mm-hmm.
in our country, there's a limit.
Yeah, yeah. Because we are not persecuted for our faith. It definitely affects how we might be responding to that question. I don't know.
I think there are groups that are maybe on the challenge of supporting people that are
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
So that's sort of taking up to the gospel of your academic somebody in your life.
For example, indeed. Yeah.
It's not always
Absolutely.
the naysayers and the
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I want to remember that and come back around to that. And so these two questions, the second one and this one, come out of the book here. So are we as assured as the slaves were about everlasting life and the presence of God in our lives? Good question. Yeah. How do we define we in this case? Well, well, take your pick. I don't have any more answers than y'all do, but
Well, I'll say this, one thing I've noticed in all the, what I work at churches, what I go to, what I do, the black churches
mhm,
are generally, gospel churches, much more spiritually involved
mhm,
than the non-black church.
okay.
Everybody finds their level of what they're comfortable with. And as we know, we have jobs and jobs and different divisions in the church that we all want to do.
Right.
So, presuming that the black culture has risen from slavery, service and immigrants since then,
Mhm,
I would say it's hard to compare ourselves to that. I think individually we certainly can be. I mean, you go visit a church like that, you get caught up in it, you're right there, at least I.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
But it's encouraging.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it can be. I'll leave it there.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts?
where they were.
All right.
That was their one thing, finding star,
Yeah,
Because they weren't, I mean, they were just working, all of that, but that was the.
yeah, yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Can you all hear what's being said online? So, for us, we tend to get distracted with life and the busyness of the world. And those who were enslaved certainly were busy, but not with their own labor. And so the presence of God and the promise of life in the kingdom to come were their bright spot, the thing that they pinned their hopes on, their relief from this world. So they may have indeed been a little bit more aware and assured of that promise and that presence. And I'm aware that this, as we have been moving through this, I've become more aware of the ways in which I think the authors expect that they're writing here for a Black audience to this book. I don't know if that is accurate, but I kind of have that feeling. So if that's the case, then the we here would be the current African-American community of Christians. For the we. That might be one way of interpreting it anyway. In which case there. Well, yeah. But here we are, and we're reading the book, and we are also Christian. So it's a fair question for us as well. I think, well, all right, yeah, Molly, go ahead.
I think that's a fair point, that if this was written for the current contemporary Black American church, I think that's a fair point. But I think that question is fair for anybody who claims faith, because in whoever it was that I didn't hear. Thank you for reinterpreting what was said in the room, because I didn't hear who it was that said it, about being not as wrapped up in being wrapped up in our own lives and not being wrapped up in somebody else's owning us. I wonder if maybe people who are going through addiction issues might connect with this better.
Oh, interesting.
People who are feeling oppressed by something that's outside of their own control.
Yeah.
It might not. This question seems like it might be for the middle class Christian church, regardless of its race.
Yeah. And so one of the things I think about this question, or these questions, is I would want to be careful that we don't idealize the faith of the enslaved, because I'm sure it wasn't monolithic any more than we come down hard on our culture and our church life and the Christians of today monolithically and say, oh, we're all terrible, or we're all worthless and weak in our faith, because we're not monolithic that way either. And just because if we were in the position of having to make the choice, that's going to be much more, that's going to be a lot grainier than saying, yeah, we're all soft. So I think it's a valid question, a valid series of questions to get us to think about it and to understand something of the culture and context of the enslaved as well. But we want to make sure that we don't just paint it all with the same brush. Does that make sense?
Well, I was Most of the labor they did was more menial kind of,
Mhm.
hard labor.
Yeah.
Where now they're always thinking about, we need to stop here, we need to buy this, we need to do that. Where their minds would have probably been freer than they were
Perhaps, yeah,
while they were enduring.
yeah, 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 yeah. Right, right. Yeah, and again, lest we think that that they were, because they were uneducated, that they were unintelligent, lest we think that. I was reading a couple articles about the spirituals, excuse me, in general, looking for something about this particular one and didn't find it, but said that they used these songs to communicate from one plantation to the next, and use the songs as code often to transmit information about events that were happening, about upcoming events, secret meetings, or the Underground Railroad is leaving tonight or tomorrow or something, and they used the songs to do that. So, I mean, it was clever. And the one story, it was a story it was some newspaper from Miami, but it wasn't the Herald or the Truth. But it said that, in Africa, they used drums to communicate across distance because they could make them simulate human intonation. But so once we got into the slavery thing in the British colonies, in the islands in particular, they outlawed drums as weapons for that reason, because they were used to communicate, and yeah. And so, and I assume that they did that in the plantation South as well. And so they came up with songs instead to do it, and couched them in the language of the Bible. And again, we have this multi-level meaning of these songs. This is the song of my heart. This is my song of prophetic condemnation of slavery. And this is a song that tells you we're escaping tomorrow night. Yeah. So, yeah. So, all right. Well, that may have been down the line somewhere to tell you, but there it is now. So, okay, let's press on. How are we doing here? As good as always on our time. All right. So the next section in the lesson here is Sticks and Stones, Crowns and Robes, which talks about the first part of the passage that we read, where Jesus is. Oh, those were all supposed to come in one at a time. All right. Well, anyway, there they all are at once. So how many of you remember learning when you were a kid, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me? Yeah. How many of you believe it?
I think back in the day, it was much more believable than now.
Yeah.
Words become weapons in themselves in many ways. They emotionally smart.
Yeah.
Most bullying, I think, when I hear about it, isn't, kids pushing each other around. It's cyber stuff,
Right now,
You
yeah.
hear suicide, text messenger, that's words. So
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, and when you see this phrase repeated, like in after school specials or in movies where kids are getting bullied and they stand up and sticks and stones may break my bones, but words, you know, there's always sort of a false bravado, it seems like, that goes along with that. Is like, I'm trying really hard to believe what I'm saying, right? And you know, to some extent, you fake it till you make it. You say it so that you come to believe it. And the more you say it, maybe the more you believe it. But at the same time, the reality is the words hurt too. They really do. And,
Well, probably happens when you're growing up. I know it's one thing, you have your friend there too. You're growing up, we're not completely self-assured.
yeah.
Sure about it. And if enough people start calling into question your lack, you know, where you lack, of course it starts making you think, and that is fine.
Yeah.
I think ultimately you live through that and you have good solid faith and you associate more with people that are positive will exemplify your capabilities. You learn to develop your sense of self-worth, and then you can push off the bullying. It's much easier.
Right.
At this age, someone wants to call me all the names of the world now. I know myself is, and I know what my limitations are. I'm comfortable with both of them. I think as adults we get to that, but that doesn't mean we still can't hurt each other with words.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's well said. And the realities of bullying, you know, as we've been talking about, are that the words can be very hurtful, especially when they're piled up and multiplied, and you can't get rid of them, and you can't get away from them. All right, so if you know, and that's one of the dangers of the phone, is that every message pops up and you're trained to look at it,
Yeah.
right?
Sad.
And so all of a sudden, every text is coming from somebody saying how terrible you are. Right? Yeah. Or even if you don't see any other positive message, maybe counteracting that. Or at least not with enough intensity or repetition to offset it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've done this sort of thing. Yeah, if one person is true, that out of your mind, you might have had 20 people with your life.
Right. Yeah. For whatever reason, our brains lock on to the negative. Yeah. Right. Yeah. 20 people love the sermon and one person walks out. You remember the one.
I think that's where the church comes in. When you're like-minded individuals that share with the church and you love it. You discuss it, be sure. Okay, you can learn a few things here.
Yeah.
That's not the majority of people.
Yeah.
Focus on it. You have to train yourself out of that. If you get out of anything, it's negative.
Yeah.
But, you know, forces of evil, they work on that. The force of evil is divide, conquer, work on your self-doubts, find willing, you know, other evil entities to go ahead and make things.
Right. So, you know, bullying seems to come in part from a need to tear somebody else down in order to feel good about oneself. That most bullies seem to have an inferiority complex behind the superiority complex. Yeah, I'm not sure what else I was going to say there. So yeah, that. And so in the tearing down, and so not only the words are designed to tear down, but also the physicality of bullying, the, you know, beating on somebody physically has that same effect of trying to prove something about one's own strength. So here we have Jesus versus some professional bullies. And so there's soldiers who have, oh my God, they bring the whole cohort in. Right? And he is stripped naked in front of all of them. And then he's mocked, humiliated, and beaten. There's verbal abuse, physical abuse, besides the social abuse. I think I have a question here. Before we do that, in the article here in the book, it says, you know, we should remember that as this is happening, Jesus' humanity, you know, that yeah, fully God, but also fully human, and so there had to be some effect here, right? And the intended effect of all of this, of course, is to break the person down. We have gotten to be very good at that in our culture. And okay, I'm getting myself lost. All right, let's go on to the question, but we'll spin out all night now. So okay, so what are ways that bullying is happening in our own society? We've named a couple things, you know, the social media and texting and all that sort of thing. Anything else that you can think of?
In the schools, you know, when the kids are young, like I was saying, it could be physical and
Sure.
outside of things.
Yeah. Is there bullying that goes on after school? I mean, after your graduation? Toward adults? Is there still bullying among adults? School board meetings. Yeah, okay. So yes, we're finding that there's bullying going on in public meetings now, okay, by adults, right? Yeah, by adults who are worried about, yeah, adults bullying other adults to prove how much they care about kids and showing what a great role model they are, right? Okay. Any other?
Gangs are bullying.
Sorry?
I think gangs are
Gang.
an example of bullying.
Yeah. Gangs definitely can be involved with bullying, and particularly across the lines. I mean, to get into it, there's a certain brutality that happens to get into a gang, but there's also a sense of belonging that seems to be it's kind of sick, maybe, but not a healthy belonging, but it's a belonging that some people don't get anywhere else. So there's that hazing, yeah. I'm sorry, just I was just kind of rambling. Yeah. Yep. So any place that there's authority, there's the potential for bullying, or power, I guess we could say. Okay. What did you do when you were bullied? Right. Yeah. Okay. Pride. You leave, avoid if possible.
For me, I
So,
run pretty good.
okay, running. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really physical bullying, so. I
Yeah.
had to take off.
Yeah.
I got far enough and then yelled you up.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Withdrawal. Some people eventually get to a place of fighting back. That I know, again, in the after-school specials, that's one of the options, right? You stand up to them and punch him in the nose. Yeah. Get them back and they'll never bother you again. Yeah. Yeah. Again, here, I think it's interesting that the way this question comes out of the book, and it doesn't ask, what did you do if you were bullied? But when you were bullied, there's the assumption that you were bullied. So either everyone has been, or again, if this is written for, especially for a Black audience, is it more likely that Black folk have experienced bullying universally than just the general population of us white folk?
You mean within their own community or?
Not necessarily, no.
I'll say this, I know that, I don't speak as a boy and a guy, when the bullying that I went through, any of it here and there, during school, it's all, guys just being guys, and they want to prove their physicality over who they can as we're all developing this kind of thing.
Right.
I'll pick those that are less physically able. Ultimately, I go out of that as you grow into adults and recognize that, this is the way to interact with each other. And I think most of my classmates all, that's how they graduate. Learn beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, which is, again, a matter of interpretation, because boys will be boys is used to excuse an awful lot of horrible behavior. So maybe we can teach boys how to be better. Unfortunately, we don't all have a clear idea of what that means either.
I think when you look at what's changed over the years, I think when they took prayer and God out of the school, starting in the morning, starting the day, that and pledge, I think that imbued a lot more respectability for everybody in the day. Let's call that out a little bit. To me, that's where everything's not down.
Well, that's a discussion for another day. I understand what you're saying, but there's, yeah. So we'll talk about that. Yeah. Okay. Still saying the pledge, so that's good. How do you respond to the idea of Jesus getting bullied?
That's part of God's plan.
I don't know that I want to blame God for that. Desta, were you going to say something?
Just gonna say I don't like it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is uncomfortable.
Painful, don't get it wrong.
Yeah. 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 We do not always think about it. And we tend to slide by this passage real fast. Read it once a year when we have to. I'm good for that.
Well, suggested that the whole time during Jesus' ministry, he was going up against the Pharisees,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he was well aware of the fact that he was way against what they were.
Sure.
They over at their face, hypocrites, I mean, don't think so. I'm gonna have to suggest that he knew in some way what would happen.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure he knew what he was getting into. Yeah. So. How would this week's spiritual speak to this situation? Oops. There we go. Do you remember the spiritual? Yeah. Ain't it that
Carry your
good news?
cross.
Yeah. Take
You
up
know,
your cross. Yeah.
Yeah, pick up your cross.
Gonna lay down this world, take up my cross.
Yeah.
So the folks who wrote that song, well, I think that's a question I got down here a little bit later. Holy mackerel. We got so much to cover and we're already out of time. All right, well, here, let's press on, shall we? So the next section is on Simon of Cyrene, the guy that was forced to carry the cross. And well, we'll get to that. Okay, so here's where you find it, is right there on the top of Africa in Libya, what is now Libya. Just down the road from Benghazi, apparently, if you've ever heard of that place. And across from Tripoli, you can see there. So there we go. And it is, right there on the Mediterranean Sea. And that's a picture of the ruins of the city of Cyrene, as we've been saying, or Cyrene, or in Greek, Cyrene. I've never heard it pronounced that way. I've only ever heard it pronounced Cyrene, but seeing it in the Greek, it is much more Cyrene or Cyrene. So there you go. I'm probably going to keep saying Cyrene. Anyway, here are a few facts about Cyrene from Wikipedia. Founded in 631 BCE and became an important and prosperous city around the 5th century BCE, so in the 400s BC, and became a Roman province in 74 when, the Romans took over the whole joint from the Greeks, basically. And we find, according to the article, that the Jewish population in Cyrene was increasingly oppressed by the Romans, although they had been, they had a good bit of autonomy before the Romans got there. They eventually end up having a rebellion in 71 AD that doesn't go well for anybody.
Identified as something like father, a little bit more about him.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I don't know too much more than what we find in the book and on the interwebs, but he was probably in Jerusalem for the Passover, we presume. So there was a sizable Jewish population in Cyrene, and so it was a feast where everybody comes to Jerusalem eventually. And we also know that they were there that there were Cyrenes there for Pentecost, because they're in the list of all the people from all these places. Oh, Cyrene. Right around there. So you'd have to get past. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you'd probably, going by a ship would probably be best, going across the Mediterranean. That would be the quickest way, maybe, or maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. Depends on the season for for sailing in the Mediterranean. Yeah, you'd have to go across, let's see, what's in between there? Libya and then Tunisia and then Egypt and then Sinai and then the peninsula. And, well, I guess, yeah. So it'd be a ways. It's a pilgrimage for sure. We can look it up. So he gets conscripted for the task of carrying the cross because, as we have seen previously, the soldiers had the opportunity to conscript somebody anytime they wanted. So do this. You do this. You must. Right? So carry my pack. Carry for a mile. Remember that one? So carry it too. He has two sons who get named later in Mark's gospel, Alexander and Rufus, and they're named here in the book. And Cyrene, whatever it is, became an important center for Christianity in the early church. And the Cyrenes were among those who carried the gospel to Alexandria and I think maybe Antioch in northern Africa also. And so it became an important center for the early church. And according to Wikipedia, according to the tradition of the Coptic Orthodox Church, which would be in Egypt, Ethiopia, northern Africa, the Copts, the founder of the church, of the Coptic Church, Saint Mark, the evangelist, the guy who wrote the book of Mark, came from Cyrene. So that's kind of interesting, and was ordained as the first bishop of Cyrene. I did not know that. I did not know that. So maybe it became that important place because of Simon, because of his experience, because of what he witnessed and took part in. He may have become a disciple of the risen Christ and then gone back and told everybody in Cyrene and takes off from there. Okay. Does it surprise you that one of the most influential centers of early Christianity was in Africa? Okay. Did you know that? Yay, PBS. Yeah, Molly.
I knew that. I had church history.
All right. All right. Does it change anything about how you think about the church and church history? We know it doesn't for Molly because she knew.
Christianity grew and spread.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so all the Middle East to some degree.
Yep.
Of course, where it all happens, so you figure it spreads out.
Yeah.
It is close by the year after.
Yeah. Molly?
It wasn't all that long ago that Egypt was a major world power at that time. And so the early church was founded in old Egypt, old Egyptian towns and cities.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's northern
Alexandria.
What?
Antioch and Alexandria. And
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's northern Africa, but it's Africa.
Right. Right. I don't always think about that because the teaching I received about world history and Western civilization focused purely on Europe, right? And the path from Europe to here, right? And not a lot about the really exciting things that happened in Africa. So anyway, all right. So there it is, Simon of Cyrene. Then the question in the book, besides attending worship, maybe I should have made this a purple one for Lent instead of just the rose. How do you spread the good news of Jesus Christ? we're gonna let that one hang because we gotta move on, but there it is.
You speak up at the opportunity.
Okay.
Please, we project my belief in God and my thanks to God. It's a regular conversation.
Mhm.
The challenge is always, you don't want to be the whack job that just is, oh, another one of these Jesus freaks here. Oh, we
Right.
got things to do. Look at the time. So at the same time, you have heard, plant some of the seeds.
Mhm.
And so that's how I fast myself, trying to plant some seeds here and there.
Yeah,
Ideally, that comes through.
good. Yeah, so just in relationship with other people, ideally, perhaps, just letting them know, this is how I think, this is what I believe, this is how I view the world. Okay. All right. Take a quick look here at soldiers. Bad behavior for a human. So, in the book, again, they point out what's going on here as we move to the second part of this story, the crucifixion. That besides brutalizing Jesus, the soldiers then crucified him without too much worry, because I imagine they were kind of used to doing that. And then they gambled for his clothes. Now, is that the sort of behavior that we usually promote in what we call civilized society? No, no. Why might somebody gamble for somebody else's clothes, do you suppose? Go ahead. Strip poker, well, one might, yeah, everyone's playing strip poker, one might be gambling for clothes. So it's not quite what's going on here. Could be that. It could be. So they're collectors. Maybe, or there's the movie The Robe, right, from 1950 whatever, where based on the book, I guess, where the robe that they put on Jesus becomes a powerful, I want to say, artifact of crucifixion, becomes the instrument by which a Roman officer is converted to Christianity in the way that happened in the movies of the 1950s. So maybe there's some of that. They were aware of that. In the book here, they suggest that perhaps it's because they were so poor, that they were so poorly paid, that they looted from the prisoners because they didn't have a good source of income. Which is and they tie into that the place where John the Baptist says to the Romans who are there, to the soldiers who are there, be satisfied with your pay and don't take bribes. So apparently, perhaps they're also taking bribes because perhaps they're not paid very well. So maybe they're doing this job because they couldn't get any other work, and they're taking the clothes because they don't have very good means themselves. And one of the Gospels says that Jesus' tunic was a single piece of cloth woven from top to bottom. So it was a pretty unusual garment in that regard. They didn't want to rip it up, and so they gambled for it. The lesson I learned about this when I was a kid was gambling is bad, but I don't think that's the lesson here. Right? I think the lesson here is about inhuman um, behavior and inhuman treatment of a whole bunch of humans, not just the prisoners, not just the condemned, but the guards as well, the soldiers as well. I think about the kid that bullied me and what happened to him to make him such a violent child at 14 years old. And so you got to wonder what happened to these soldiers that they just crucify people and gamble for their clothes. Yeah, they're following orders, and life is short and brutal. So, it's what you do. You kill people that the emperor says kill. But again, I don't think that's what God has intended for us, right? So, so there's a liberation that needs to happen, not only for the condemned, but also perhaps for the instruments of the violence done to them. All right, yeah, I said that. Are there any parallels in our society?
Well, all you think is prisons,
Mm-hmm.
especially the real hard, maximum security ones, there's whole heck of more than we've seen it in the movies, and then you hear about it. And,
Yeah,
it becomes subculture.
yeah. Yeah, prison, and add to that we are now using for-profit prisons that where governments of cities and states guarantee that they'll have a 90% full prison. Yeah, that's part of the prison industrial complex as it's known, right? So and that appears in here somewhere. I don't know if that's accurate, but I've heard it in other places that they're guaranteed a population in their prisons so that they are guaranteed a certain amount of money. Well, how are you going to guarantee that you've got that many criminals?
I'm sorry, Mr. Dalton, that parking ticket is a real crime against humanity. We're gonna have to big up.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you take a traffic fine, and if somebody isn't able to pay it, then you add more fine onto it until they get to a point where it becomes a felony, how much money they owe, and you put them in jail. That's not a good thing. So corruption and targeting poor populations.
What about this? Because they, for the big time lawyers.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Which often means communities of color. And the other side, again, is militarization of the police. So this talks about, in the book, they talk about some of the police killings of Black folk. The book came out in 2016, so the most recent ones they make reference to are Freddie Gray and Sandra Bland. There's a long litany since then, of course, not the least of which George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, where the police have acted brutally, in particular toward Black folk. So again, yeah, yeah. And so you have this culture of police brutality that seems to be pervasive. Not that all cops are brutal, but all police forces seem to have brutality within them. It seems that way. Again, not wanting to paint everybody with the same brush, but it's a it's a broad problem. And the militarization side is building up the force capacity of the police beyond, in London, they carry a stick. Here, they have body armor and assault rifles.
And that's because the criminals
Some of the criminals do, but they also deploy that level of force against, say, a group of peaceful protesters. Yeah. Or somebody with a tail light. Yeah. Right. So there are some parallels in our culture that need the healing of the gospel on both sides of that, right? And so if you haven't read this, I'd encourage you to take a look at it and see what they think. I'm not fully comfortable with drawing a straight line from the soldiers to police officers, but I get it. Right. So how might African Americans, that should say African Americans, I think, relate to Jesus as presented here? And who would take the role of the soldiers? I mean, I kind of painted the picture for you. Yeah. Yeah. So unjust condemnation, brutality, police brutality. So the police probably would take the role of the soldiers, although it might be a mob. Oh, did I have that? Oh, well, I didn't do a very good job. What is going on? Got it. Okay. I was supposed to say how might enslaved Africans, African Americans, answer the same question. So for those who were enslaved, would they experience Jesus, this story about Jesus? Yeah. Yeah. Beaten physically, beaten emotionally, humiliated, brutalized. At the hands of their taskmasters. So how would this week's spiritual lens speak to the situation, either for the enslaved or for our modern day? Yeah. So the message of the song is about hope. It's hope deferred in some sense, waiting for getting out of this world. But there's also laying down this world, taking up the cross, and going to take it home to Jesus. So how can the church respond to the needs of the bullied and the bully to bring an end to this cycle of violence? Yes, it is. Very big question. Prayer, education, and maybe the same thing, laying down with this world, shoulder up of my cross. Maybe those of us who, going back to that early question about Are we the softies? You know, well, we're not in a position where we're persecuted, but maybe we are called, and maybe what taking up the cross means for us who are not persecuted is that we stand close enough to the ones who are in solidarity with them that we might end up being a target as well. I'm gonna lay down this world and show the rope of my heart. Take me to my Jesus. Ain't that good news? Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for the opportunity to study and to think together about the call of the gospel and the call of Christ to take up the cross. Lord, be at work in us to help us understand what you mean for us to take up the cross, and give us courage and give us faith to follow where you lead us. Keep us safe until we gather again in Jesus' name. And let all God's children say, amen.